So our app needs routes. If we want to have a view that's going to show only the authors separately from the books and maybe eventually manage authors, we need to have a route specifically for that. So this video is going to be about TanStack Router or Router, depending on how you want to pronounce it. TanStack Router adds type safety to the route management. If you are familiar with React Router, using TanStack Router is going to be very simple, and the transitioning is also going to be great because the development experience is pretty good. So let's go ahead and install this in our project. There are a couple of options. One is creating an app from the scratch, but we have an app that we created already with Vite. Our UI was made with Vite. We need to install the TanStack Router, the Vite plugin, and router DevTools. The DevTools are optional, but it's very nice to have, and we will take a look at that soon. So first of all, let's install TanStack Router and router DevTools, and then additionally the router plugin for Vite. I'm going to copy these lines and then go to my terminal and do pnpm add on my UI package, all these packages, and then I will add as a dev dependency TanStack Router plugin. Great. So looking at our package.json, we see that React Router, TanStack React Router, and React Router DevTools is now installed as a dependency. And as a dev dependency, we have the router plugin for Vite. The next step is to configure our Vite plugin. So we add TanStack Router to the configuration. And I'm going to copy these lines from the documentation and go to the vite.config.ts, import that here, and then I will add the TanStack Router configuration before the React plugin is added. So that will be here, and that's it. The next step is to create this file structure for our routes. Inside the src directory, we're going to create the routes directory, and then we are going to add this __ root.tsx and then an index file, and then also an about route, so we can have an idea of how TanStack Router works. So I'm going to do that now. Create a new folder on src called routes. Now I'll go with root.tsx and look at what's going to happen now. I'm going to create the file and automatically I get this auto-completed, which is part of one of the wonders of TanStack Router development experience. And also we can see that this route3 gen.ts file is auto-generated. And this is a file that we can add to our gitignore. And if we look at the comments here, we can see that we should not make any changes to the file. This file will be updated when we add more routes. So for example, if I go now and I add an index.tsx, I will have this code auto-generated, and my 3gen file now will also have an index route. Same thing if I now add an about, we have the code generated for our base route, and that this auto-generated file will also contain the route. So as we add more routes, can we add dynamic paths where we can pass an ID, etc. The routes are going to be defined in this gen file. And this is also going to support the type system that TanStack Router uses. Okay, moving forward to the steps in the documentation, we are going to replace the auto-generated component with these contents here. So I'm going to return all of this, and I'm going to import the couple of components that we're missing, like link from TanStack React Router, and then our DevTools. So now this is the route. This is the component that is going to be loaded when we go to the base route in our app, and the component will always be rendered. And additionally, whatever is passed to the index component is going to be rendered in the outlet. Some frameworks use yield. Actually, let me pause this and explain correctly. The outlet component in TanStack Router is a placeholder used in the parent route layout to display the components of matching child routes. So when the browser matches a nested route, outlet dynamically renders the child route's content within the parent, making it easy to build layouts and share common structures like headers or navigation bars across different pages. Okay, let's go back. But here is where we are going to replace content based on our route. I'm going to replace or rename these components to something more unique. About component, and here index component. And now we need to modify our main.tsx, which is this view that we have here. So far, we are not using the routes. Now we're going to modify things here, and we're not going to render our app component anymore. We are going to render routes, and then from the index route is where we're going to move all the contents of the app.tsx. So let's comment this out and let's look at the documentation and bring this imports, then the generated route tree that we saw before. And now we're going to create a router instance with the route tree. And now register the router instance for tape safety. And finally, we need to render the app with the router provider. I'm going to copy this, pass it here. And now if I go to our UI, we see that we are rendering the homepage and this about. And if you look at here, we have the TanStack Router DevTools plugin, which is giving us information of what's the route, where we are right now. And if I go to about, it tells me you loaded the root route and then you went to about route. And we can see this both have this green color because TanStack Router always renders the parent component and it drills down to the target component where we are matching based on the URL. So let's go back to home and let's bring our application code that we had here before. So I'm just going to move everything from one file to the other. So now index will render this and a lot of things to bring. And there it is. So now when we go to the home page, we see the books. And we go to about, we see whatever we had in this about auto-generated route. Good. And by the way, this way to generate routes is known or called file-based route configuration. We can also declare routes in a single file for convenience, but the recommended way to do it with TanStack Router is with the file-based route, because that way the framework can do code splitting and it is better for organization and performance as your application grows. Always good. So now what I want to do is have a route that can take me to the details of this book. And the route should look something like /books/some ID. And additionally, the books route, what we have right now, should not be the base route. It should be on /books. So let's take care of that. First of all, I will add a folder for my books routes. And now in here, I will add an index. And actually, what I need to do now is move this index file inside the books directory. So let's just remove this. I'm going to move that over here. And then I will regenerate another index route for the base route. In the root component, I will remove this. Actually, instead of remove it, I'm going to replace it. And I'm going to delete this about route. We don't need it anymore. We can see now that TypeScript is giving us autocomplete with the possible routes that we have. We just removed the about route, but we added one for books. We can see that we are already seeing some benefits of using TanStack Router. So let's call this one books. And now if I go to books, I am loading my books. Great. Now, if we want to add a dynamic parameter for looking at an ID, what we need to do now is create a new file and use this name notation, dollar, and then the name of the variable that we want to have for the parameter. It can be book ID or just ID. In this case, I'm going to call it bookid.tsx. Now, if I go back to the root component and I change something here, we can see that we can now also use a route that uses a dynamic value. Great. I'm going to copy this link because what I want to do now is here in this row, I'm going to add a link to the single book route. So let's do that. Let's go and find this one here. Okay, so let's make this one very simple. I'm going to import the link from TanStack Router and it's going to be book ID. And now we need to pass a parameter and the parameter is going to be book ID. The book ID that I have here is a number, but the URLs use strings. So what I'm going to do is say book.id to string. I will pass the book title and that's it. If we see at the bottom, it looks very small, but we can see that if I hover, I see books/41, books/38, etc. I'm going to click to the lighthouse, which is 41, and it's taking me to the new route here. Now I will go to the book ID route. I'm going to do use params from my router. And from here, I can fetch values that are parameters already defined in the URL structure. So I can say I'm going to just print or render the ID. So there it is. Now we have book ID 41 and I'm going to open the TanStack Router DevTools so we can see how things are changing. Here we are at the home page. Then we go to books and then I will go to this book, The Daily Stoic with ID 38, and there it is. Now what I need to do is do an API call specifically for the book with ID 38. And we haven't added anything yet for that. We have a route that fetches all the books, but we need one that fetches a single book. So I'm going to do that now. So here I have a fetch book function that takes an ID number, and then I'm going to use our RPC routes to do a get method on the books API, and then I'll pass the ID that comes as a number as a string to the API call. If the request is not okay, I will get the error from the request JSON output and throw. Otherwise, I will grab the response and return it. And now that we have our fetch book API call in the UI, I will use it in the book ID route and I will import it here. Then I will use reuse query, and in the component itself, now I can get the book data using the API call that we just created. So as you can see here, we are getting the book ID parameter, which comes as a string, but then fetch book takes a number. So we need to parse it again back to number. We can also set some initial data. And then what I'm going to do is just remove this string and I can stringify the output for now. We're going to make it pretty soon. So there it is. We can see the network activity where we're reloading. We are fetching the specific book that we want. If we go back to books, we're going to fetch all the books. If I go back to 38, I'm going to fetch again the same book, right? And then 33. And since Drizzle generates an array, even though this is a single value, we have a couple of options. We can grab the first element of the array in the UI, or we can go to our API, and here in books, in the books response, we can just grab the first element. So if I do this, now I need to remove this initial data because it's just going to be an object as a response. And there it is. So now if for some reason there is no book data, I need to handle that case. So here after I fetch the book, I'm going to ask if there is no book. I'm just going to return this HTML that shows that the book has not been found. So let's say if I do some ID that I know that I don't have, we have this output. And now let's go back to an existing one, and I'm going to add some styles for this output here. Okay, so I added some styling here. I didn't want to go through that step by step, but you can find the code in the repo. But basically, yeah, we are just presenting the details of the book in a nicer way. Here in the future, we can have more information like how many pages the book has or ISBN, etc. And now if I want to go back to books, I'm seeing this issue, and this is happening because I'm overriding the key, or actually using the same key for a single book and all the books. So I'm going to use the query key book as singular for a single book. So we keep books for the list of books in our table. This should fix the problem. If I go back to books now, there it is. So with this, we have our books route, homepage route, and a route specifically for the book details view. Awesome. So that was a little crash course on how to use TanStack Router. I know that I said the previous video was going to be the last video of this series, but I want to also cover better auth authentication system. So yeah, that's going to be for the next video. See you there.